Leadville is one of the most famous mining towns in Colorado and is known for its colorful history. The town was officially named Leadville in 1878 after lead carbonate was discovered in the area, but it had also been known as Cloud City, Slab Town, and Oro City. Leadville experienced two mining booms, the first in 1860 when placer gold was discovered in nearby California Gulch, and another in 1877 when silver was discovered. In 1866, after the first mining boom had been played out and all the placer gold had been taken, Leadville's population plummeted. It would be 11 years until the prospectors who had stayed discovered the silver deposits, and it wouldn't be until 1879 that news of the discovery reached the rest of the nation. Leadville was a town that survived extinction. Gold gave birth to it, and silver sustained it. This unique past meant that the settlers in the late 1870s and 1880s were not building a new town, but rather reviving an old one. During this time, many ghost stories were spread by the settlers of Leadville. Some were later explained, and some remain mysteries even today. The following are 3 ghost stories that I have discovered that greatly disturbed the town. The Ghost of the Morning Star Mine, 1879. Outside of Leadville's east side, on Carbonate Hill, lies the Morning Star Mine. The mine was owned by the first state governor of Colorado, John Long Rout. When silver was discovered in Leadville, Rout investigated the area's potential and spent $10,000 on the Morning Star Mine. Although Rout would lose the governor's race in 1879, that same year, the Morning Star Mine showed a rich yield, and Rout would ultimately sell the mine for $1 million. But one more thing had happened in 1879. One of the workers in the Morning Star Mine was killed. On August the 8th, this article was published. Killed in Rout's Mine. The Eclipse says a man was instantly killed at the Morning Star Mine on Carbonate Hill by the caving in of dirt from the roof of a drift. The man was a German, and we did not learn his name. Late last evening, parties were down hunting for the coroner, but the inquest has been deferred till this morning. The body was taken to the man's home, but the inquest will probably be held at Rogers' undertaking rooms. The property in which the accident occurred belongs to Governor Rout and Joseph W. Watson. It wasn't long after that a ghost story began to be spread by the miners at the Morning Star. This article explained it on August the 15th. Was it a ghost? A gentleman from Leadville tells the news a queer story that was current in the neighborhood of the Morning Star Mine, and that had created some consternation among the miners. A few days ago, a man was killed in that mine by the caving in of a lot of earth and rock, and none of the miners, aware of the fact, cared to work in the place where the man lost his life. A day or two after the accident, a German happened that way in search of work, and was sent into the drift where his predecessor was killed. He had hardly been lowered to the bottom of the shaft before he began violently shaking the rope of the windlass, and in reply to inquiries from the men above, he said that there was a dead man in the drift. Supposing that some straggler had fallen down the shaft during the night, the man was told to put the body in the bucket. Having signaled that he had done so, the men at the windlass commenced turning the cranks, and as the bucket reached the surface, they discovered that it was empty. When the German came up at noon, explanations were demanded, but he claimed that the men were trifling with him and stating that the bucket came up empty, and insisted positively that he had placed a dead man in it. His description of the corpse agreed in every particular with the appearance of the miner who was killed in the drift, although the German was ignorant of any fatal accident having happened in the mine. After being informed of it, he declined to work there any longer. The Haunting at Brooklyn Heights, 1880. In 1880, a haunting at the Brooklyn Heights area of Leadville gained attention in the community. On February 14th, this story was published. Haunted House. One of Leadville's unexplainable mysteries. A beautiful residence on Brooklyn Heights, given over to ghosts and goblins damned. A murdered Mexican who will not down. The enterprising real estate and house renting agency of Robert H. Buck and Company have an elephant on their hands in the shape of a haunted house situated just across California Gulch on Brooklyn Heights. The matter has been kept very quiet, but not so quiet but what rumors that there was a haunted house in the city and that Buck and Company knew all about it reached the ears of a Chronicle reporter. This intelligence was received on yesterday morning, and yesterday afternoon, the matter of the mystery was taken up. The office of Buck and Company in the Boston block was visited, and the senior member of the firm found at his desk. On being questioned as to the fact of his having the control of a haunted house, Mr. Buck at first scoffed the idea and made light of it, but realizing that the man of news had more than an inkling of the affair, made a clean breast of the subject by saying, "It is no use to deny or try to keep back anything that you newspapermen once get a scent of, and I admit that I have the renting of a house wherein strange sights and sounds are seen and heard both day and night, and I find it almost an impossibility to keep a tenant there. They come to me and rent the house one day, move in, and then the following day return the key, saying that the house is haunted and that it is an impossibility for them to remain therein. It is annoying, to say the least, but I cannot help it. The house has only been the theater of such supernatural events a few weeks, and I have made a thorough investigation of the premises without finding anything of a suspicious-looking nature. I never saw nor heard anything unusual there, but then I am compelled to accept the statements of the people who have been driven out by those sights and sounds as being something more than mere fancy. The history of the building is just the least romantic. A Mexican having erected it and then being murdered in his bed by unknown parties who were never brought to justice. It is all very strange, and I cannot explain it away. But if you are desirous of investigating the matter further, I will send you to the present tenant upon one condition. What is that? That in writing up whatever you may obtain on the subject, you will give neither his name nor the exact location of the house, from the reason that it will give the place such notoriety that I could never rent it, even should those noises be traced to natural causes. The condition named was readily agreed to, and within an hour the tenant in question was found at his workbench. He was found to be a man of more than ordinary intelligence, and on learning that the scribe had come direct from Mr. Buck, and the object of the visit, paused from his work and began in a serious, studied, and careful manner a narrative of what he had recently witnessed at the haunted house. "I do not believe in spirits," he began, "and have always hooted at the idea of dead people coming back to this earth, frequenting their last habitations, and enacting over again some deed or scene in which the principal actor, or at least one of the principal actors. But now I must acknowledge that I am almost ready to believe anything that I see or hear of a nature similar to that which I have been in contact with during the past few days." After a long pause, he went on. "The other day I wanted a house, and called upon Mr. Buck for the purpose of ascertaining if he could furnish me with one. When I stated my desires, he informed me that he had an empty house, but that canny sounds were heard within its walls, and that its former tenants pronounced it haunted. The rent almost a song, and the house a fair one, and having a brave little wife, I said, 'Mr. Buck, I'll take the house and live in it.' Well, I moved in that afternoon, and the fun commenced. Wife had gone over into town to make a few purchases, and I, building a good fire in the stove, drew up the rocking chair and sat down. My feet were cold, so pulling off my boots, I placed my feet upon the hearth in order to warm them. I had sat there probably 2 minutes, perhaps longer, when I became aware of the fact that someone was in the room. The feeling was an uncomfortable one, and I thought to myself, I am preparing to swallow this ghost story and spirit business on short notice. I endeavored to shake off the feeling, and looking over, just across the stove, saw the dim outlines of a man. He was seated in a chair, and his feet, like mine, were resting on the stove. The lower limbs were about all I could see at first glance, but as I continued to look, the rest of the form developed gradually into plain view. and I beheld what looked to me like a Mexican. His clothes were very poor, and one side of his head was crushed in and bleeding in a frightful manner. I was horror-stricken and powerless for a moment, and the strange eyes seemed to pierce my very soul. Regaining control of my muscles, I quickly leaped to my feet to find the object gone. It had disappeared quickly, as a flash of lightning could have vacated the room. That was my first experience, and I was completely unnerved. I went outside and busied myself in the backyard until my wife returned. I said nothing to her, thinking perhaps that what I had just seen was only imagination, and that I had dropped off into a doze at the stove, and that the rumors of the house being haunted had worked upon my mind in so curious a manner. Wife prepared supper, and everything about the house looked quite cheerful and homelike. She poured out the tea, passed me my cup, and then gave a deep sigh. I looked at her, followed her gaze to the stove, and there saw the Mexican, just as I had a couple of hours before. By an almost superhuman effort, I raised my right hand. The apparition had gone as sudden as before. Well, neither I nor my wife ate any supper that night. Just as we were getting ready to retire for the night, a host of strange noises commenced in the room. There was a sound as of footsteps, the plain double click of a revolver hammer, a dull heavy blow, and a deep-pained groan. These noises were repeated for about an hour and sounded for all the world like a fight to the death between two or more men. Then the sounds suddenly ceased, and nothing more was heard during the night. The next morning, I went to my work, and when I went back to the house at noon, nothing unusual had transpired to alarm my wife. Up to the supper hour, nothing had developed, and I began to think that the affair was over with. When we went to bed, though, the apparent tragedy of the night before was repeated, and in addition, the furniture began moving about the room in a sort of methodical manner. There was sufficient light in the room to discern objects, and to see the chairs and table going around without mortal aid or assistance was enough to even paralyze a saint. Wife whispered something about covering up our heads, and I accepted the suggestion as soon as it was offered. The ghostly business went on, though, and presently our bed began to move. It went around the room 2 or 3 times and then stopped, and every noise ceased also. Wife and I said not a word. We were locked in each other's arms, and so after a while we both went to sleep. The next night, last night, the same ordeal was experienced again, only that it appeared like the Mexican was trying to get in bed with us, and was undressing for that purpose all night. This morning, wife went over to a lady friend's, and tonight we will seek a boarding house, and there remain a few days until I can find another house to move into. I am not a believer in ghosts, hobgoblins, and devils, but there is something about that house that I cannot understand, and I am not inquisitive enough to inquire into the matter any further. My candid opinion is that some invisible powers are at work there, and as I do not want to interfere with them, I shall quietly move out and leave them monarchs of the situation, free to raise merry hell just so long as they choose. There, that is all. Is the property of sufficient value to warrant a person attempting to frighten all parties away so as to purchase it for a trifling sum? No, the house and lot altogether is not worth more than $500. I would not give 500 cents for it. The place is haunted, or something after that nature, and I think will have to be let alone and empty until it rots down. Further developments are anxiously awaited in this, Leadville's greatest and most recent sensational mystery. A follow-up article would be published on March 6. Murdered was the Brooklyn Heights burly Mexican who now makes night hideous in that quarter. Strange sounds and appalling sights at his cabin. A blood-curdling apparition is said to frequent a lone and deserted cabin on the other side of California Gulch. The reality of the ghost story is authenticated by statements of men of undoubted veracity. Men of iron nerve have faced the phantom only to be palsied with horror. Those to whom his ghost ship has appeared, although unwilling to speak fully about the matter, decline a repetition of the visit, avowing that no money could induce them to be again subjected to the presence of the dreadfully visaged ghoul. The apparition is said to be the spirit of a Mexican who claims to have been murdered for his money and returns to point out his murderers to an earthly judgment. On entering the cabin, the boldest is seized with an unaccountable fear, and the appearance of the specter, the distinct although transparent outlines of a man with a ghastly gash across his throat, the blood gouts on his clothing, a voice saying, in Spanish, that he was murdered by his comrades, all causes the would-be intentions to make a hasty exit. On Saturday night, over 200 men congregated at and left Joe Billings' store for the scene of the manifestation. The cabin was entirely too small to accommodate such a congregation, but the blanched countenances and affrighted expressions of those who did go inside was sufficient to appall the rest and cause them to hurry away from the accursed place. The excited appearance of those who returned from the visit on Saturday night, some with clothing torn and mud besmeared, evidenced their hurried pell-mell exit. Under the guidance of Jim Chamberlain, Smokey Jones, and other brave spirits, over 500 people visited the lone and haunted cabin again last night, the different parties looking like a band of goblins themselves as they groped through the almost impenetrable darkness of midnight by the dim and flickering glimmer of a single lantern, and in muttered, incoherent conversation discussed the matter. At about 8 o'clock in the evening, a party of 7 stalwart miners, who happened to be off shift for the night, called at the editorial rooms of the Chronicle and inquired of a reporter who could lead them to the scene. They were directed to Colonel McNary, who keeps a cigar and tobacco stand in the Billings block and the key to the haunted house. 2 hours later, the party returned to the office and said that they had seen the ghost and that all reports of it were true. We cannot vouch for the reality of the reported nightly appearance of this Mexican disembodied spirit, having not yet investigated the matter. One thing is certain, however. No less than 2,000 persons have visited the cabin within the last 4 nights, and the most startling stories are spread over the town. Many prominent businessmen have made the attempt to interview the spirit, and when near the cabin have weakened and returned. A large delegation has been formed for a like expedition at 12 o'clock tonight, and a reporter will be detailed to accompany it and give the result. I went through the next archived edition of that newspaper and could find no reference to the haunting at Brooklyn Heights. However, on March 10th, a person going by the name Varnick wrote a letter about Leadville and the ghost sensation that would be published in Golden, Colorado on March 20th. In the letter, a little more background information was given to the ghost. Leadville, March 10th, 1880. And now that ghosts really exist in Leadville, there seems to be but little doubt. The good people of Leadville have been startled again by the appearance of a ghost in the suburbs of the city on the south side of California Gulch. His ghost ship comes this time in the form of a Mexican with a sunken, vacant, staring, awful expression, with his throat cut from ear to ear. This strange phenomena holds forth in an old cabin that was built in 1860. At least 5,000 of the citizens of Leadville have been to see this greatest of all wonders, but the bravest hearts and the strongest nerves weakens at the sight. Those that have seen this supernatural being express a desire that they never meet again. He speaks Spanish and claims to have been murdered by his comrades for his money, and has come back to Earth to expose his murderers and have them brought to justice. In the days of old, in the days of gold, in the days of '61, when the fame of California Gulch had reverberated in Santa Fe, New Mexico, 3 Mexicans packed burros with onions and started for the new El Dorado. After a long and tiresome journey, the 3 descendants of Montezuma camped sometime in August 1861. After disposing of their onions, for which they found ready sale at fabulous prices, they took exchange there for gold dust, at that time the standard currency of the camp. Those greasers, finding themselves possessed of more wealth than they had ever seen before, and being skilled in the art of mining, invested their combined interests in a placer mine, and therefrom realized a handsome remuneration. They could only speak enough of the English language to make their wants known, and did not seem disposed to be neighborly or want friends. The three worked industriously for about 4 weeks. When the miners noticed their number had diminished to 2, upon making inquiries of the remaining 2 as to the whereabouts of their partner, they told the miners by signs and poor English that their partner had gone back to their native country after a supply of provisions. The remaining 2 continued to working their mine until late in the fall, when the water supply began to fail, when they sold their mine and was supposed to have returned to their native country from whence they came, since which time nothing was heard of them, and perhaps little thought until the appearance of this strange operation, which is certainly one of the greatest wonders of the age. The Haunted Log Cabin, 1883. Another cabin was said to be haunted in Leadville, only this time the effects of the ghost were much more severe. From the Carbonet Chronicle, June 16th, 1883. A haunted house. The curious actions of a real, live, and audacious ghost, taking a woman from bed and throwing her on the floor. The residents of the southwestern portion of the city are in a state of alarm. The startling intelligence has been conveyed to them that there is a haunted house in their midst, and their terror is great. It is declared that there is no superstition in the matter whatever, but that there is a real, live ghost who nightly makes his appearance and terrifies the inmates of the house in which it has taken up its abode. A Chronicle reporter yesterday investigated the matter, and he was placed in possession of a most remarkable story. At the log cabin, 604 West Front Street, there resides Mrs. Quirk, her daughter, Mrs. Gleason, and several young girls. Mr. Quirk is out of the city mining, and Mr. Gleason is in Denver working, he having been told by the doctors not to stay in Leadville. About 3 months ago, 2 boys were playing cards in the cabin. One of them got up and went into the yard, and he was surprised to see a figure of a man gliding toward him. He rushed into the house and informed those inside of what he had seen. The door was immediately locked and the lamps turned down. The inmates were then stricken with terror when they saw a face appear at the window. It remained there for some time and then faded away. Since that time, the ghost has been making nightly visits. Mrs. Gleason has been the greatest sufferer. From a stout, healthy woman, she is now weakened and in bad health. About 2 months ago, she was awakened from her slumbers by feeling a cold hand placed on her cheek. On opening her eyes, she saw standing beside her the figure of a little man. On another occasion, she awoke and saw the same figure standing at the window. She called to a man named Michael Kane, who was stepping in the house, and her fright may well be imagined when the mysterious form, with an icy glare in its eyes, approached the bed and placed 2 weights on her breast. Night after night, since then, footsteps have been heard by all the residents moving through the house. Tuesday night last, however, capped the climax. Mrs. Gleason had retired to her bed about 11:30 o'clock with her sister Mary. She had only been in bed about 5 minutes when she saw the door of a closet slowly open. She was in a fearful state of alarm and could not move. She cried aloud and awoke the entire house. Slowly, the figure came towards the bed. It did not walk, but appeared to glide through the air. Mrs. Gleason was almost dead with fright. She put out her hand to keep the figure away, but it was pushed aside and the ghost threw itself on the bed. It lay there for some time, and Mrs. Gleason screamed loudly. The ghost then seized her roughly and picked her up in its arms, threw her across the room near the floor. The poor woman gave 3 groans and then lay motionless. By this time, the inmates of the cabin had appeared upon the scene, and they were greatly alarmed to see Mrs. Gleason lying on the floor. In a few moments, she regained consciousness, but seeing the mysterious visitor standing in the door, she fainted. 2 or 3 times more did she become conscious, only to faint again on seeing the ghost in the doorway. The poor woman's friends, sisters, and mother thought she was about to die and were weeping profusely. A man named McVeigh, who keeps a saloon across the street from the cabin, was called in, and he at once said that the woman was dying. Her apparently lifeless form was picked up and carried into another room and laid on the bed. There was a closet in the room, and whenever Mrs. Gleason again became conscious, her eyes, which were rolling wildly, were turned towards it. She still saw the ghost and was greatly agitated. McVeigh was standing near the bed, and it passed between him and her, moving along in the air. She cried a great deal and begged the ghost to go away, but it still remained. Her mother, thinking that she was going to die, thought it best to send for Father Ponsardin. This worthy spiritual advisor soon put in an appearance, and he found the woman in a very feverish state of alarm. He listened to the story attentively and then prayed for the woman. He advised her to leave the house as soon as she possibly could, but added if the ghost had come to give her any warning of approaching trouble, that it would follow her wherever she went. Taking Father Ponsardin's advice, Mrs. Quirk has secured another abode and yesterday removed to it. For over a month, Mrs. Gleason has been unable to sleep in a bed. She might lie down, but her alarm was so great that she could not rest. Her friends tried to pacify her, but their efforts in this direction were fruitless. The most mysterious part of the story is that the entire inmates of the house have distinctly heard the figure moving around the house at night. If it were not for this, the whole affair might be looked upon as hallucinations of Mrs. Gleason's. As it is, the matter has caused a decided sensation. I haven't been able to find anything more about this ghost story, but maybe there is an explanation. Perhaps there really was a man in that house who was terrorizing Mrs. Gleason, and the supernatural parts of the story, like the man moving in the air, were a result of hallucinations from the severe anxiety and stress she was experiencing. It's a common trope in horror movies and stories that something menacing is hiding in the closet. Perhaps for Mrs. Gleason, there really was.